After losing his family in a ruthless superhuman attack, Han Sung-hyun retreats from the world, shattered by trauma, but everything changes when he discovers the power to control avatars. Using his overpowered clones, Sung-hyun sets out on a relentless path of vengeance. In a world of swords and magic, the fearsome immortal king warred against his rival, the Knight of Light. The monstrous monarch truly lived up to his name as the continent's nightmare, but the power of light was on humanity's side. Guided by this power, the Knight of Light was blessed with a luminous blade and wings. He was the paragon of righteousness. If you ask our MC, the fight between dark and light was a bit too theatrical for his taste. Well, he was just chilling on his couch, with snacks on the table, wrapped in a blanket while watching a performance after all. You see, this bum was actually witnessing two of his avatars fighting against one another with the fate of the world on the line. How did it end up like this? Let's rewind the clock a little bit to the day when everything changed. An investigator from the Special Investigations Department of the Ability Management Bureau was on Han Sung-hyun's doorstep to ask a few questions. From the weary look on his face, it was clear that he was not in the mood to talk to anyone about anything. The investigator quickly did his checks and left with a reminder to make sure to report to the Bureau if he ever awakens any abilities. Hearing the mention of awakening left a sour taste in the cripple's mouth. This short conversation with the investigator was the first human interaction he had with an outsider in half a year. He was just glad that it was over. But at least it meant he wouldn't need to open his front door for another 6 months for the next check. Most of his food supplies had already gone bad and expired. It had been 2 years since he touched grass and went out. I bet some of you could beat that record. Some would say that Han Sung-hyun was pathetic. They might curse him for being so weak-willed. But he was just another victim of this fucked-up world. Walking back to the couch, breaking news about an awakened arsonist committing random crimes before being transported to another world was airing. Those awakened people truly set a fiery emotion in Sung-hyun. One day, humanity began randomly awakening mysterious powers that defied the laws of nature and logic. Once someone awakens an ability, they would be forcibly transported to another world within 24 hours. If they met certain conditions, they would be able to return to Earth. But in reality, only a tiny fraction of awakeners could actually manage to survive and come back. As a result of feeling imminent doom, some unhinged, superpowered people would commit reckless and inhumane crimes before being forcibly transported. 2 years ago, Han Sung-hyun fell victim to one of these random acts of criminal madness. He lost his legs and his family in a blaze of lunacy. Maybe he also lost the courage to ever stand again. He tried his best to recover and rehabilitate his injuries as hard as he could, but it wasn't that simple. He had been keeping up with the routine in hopes of regaining some of his legs' functions to no avail. It felt like a pathetic attempt to take back what he lost from that incident. Han Sung-hyun changed. Now, he sank into terror at the thought of stepping a single foot outside the door. He wondered if something would have changed, if only he had been more courageous. He desperately wanted to escape the prison known as his own home and go anywhere at all. His self-deprecating thoughts were interrupted by the detection of a dimensional inflection point connecting him to the Akasha system. He randomly awakened a unique skill. Never in a million years could he have expected that this turn of events would happen. He was granted the unique skill simply called Avatar, not to be confused with the last Airbender. With the awakening came the 24-hour countdown until the mandatory transfer to another world. Han Sung-hyun was not ready for anything like this at all. Fate must be toying with him. Like an impatient commander, the system expedited the timer. If he didn't enter the transfer zone within the next few minutes, the forced escort feature would be enforced. Panicking, Sung-hyun crawled on the floor as fast as he could. He quickly rummaged through his closet for anything useful. People say that after being transferred, it would take someone at least a year to return to Earth. To make matters worse, time moves 10 times slower in other dimensions. That meant he would have to survive for 10 whole years to be able to return. With his spaghetti legs, could he even survive? Trembling in front of the assigned transfer zone in his living room, only 3 minutes were left for preparation. Sung-hyun packed every outdoor gear he could find in his closet, while fearfully staring at the countdown. He tried to step into the light, but he just couldn't do it. He couldn't even step outside his door before falling apart, and this system was forcing him to enter a different world with no power and skills. Forget about lasting for 10 whole years. He might not even survive for a whole day. Then he remembered the other notification he had just received. He was granted the ability called Avatar, so he shouted the activation at the top of his lungs, hoping that something would save him from this absurd situation. As soon as Sung-hyun opened his eyes, he was met with a perfect copy of his original body. From the appearance, clothes, and even the crutch, they were mirror images of one another. The original Sung-hyun suddenly felt a pang of pain in his brain. He started seeing two of his faces, and it must have messed up his head. Still confused about the whole situation, he turned around and looked in the other direction. Sung-hyun realized that he was sharing his vision with the avatar's eyes. He tried to move the avatar, but moving a separate body was a lot more nauseating than he thought. Moving both his avatar and main body was practically impossible. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough time to experiment further as the countdown reached the last minute. Sure, he had an ability, but having a perfect clone of his weak body seemed futile. Of all the abilities out there, he got stuck with something that just highlighted how useless he was. He wondered if some hero could save the day and go to the other world in his stead. Before Sung-hyun could even finish his thought, he realized that he might just have the perfect setup to do just that. So, he willed his avatar to walk forward and step into the transfer zone. and the process kicked off. He concentrated on controlling the clone as much as he could. Finally, the blue light of the transfer zone intensified. Sunghyun just wanted to throw a Hail Mary and test an insane idea out. But the transfer zone recognized his avatar as him. The avatar was successfully transported to the Auterica dimension. From out of thin air, his clumsily equipped body spawned in the middle of a forest. He looked at his body and the surroundings curiously. We all saw him send the avatar into the zone, yet his consciousness had seemingly tagged along. Fortunately, the system was kind enough to inform him that he could always return to Earth through the return option in the karma shop. Speaking of karma, those things were the main point system that he could collect and accumulate through his adventures. Currently, he has 0 karma, an absolute broke boy. Once again, that stinging pain inside his mind returned. His perception was split between the forest and the living room. His consciousness didn't transfer to the other world. He was just sharing his vision with the avatar. Seeing 2 different worlds at once could really mess with a person's mind, so in an attempt to curb the head-splitting pain, he cancelled his summoning. Suddenly, the clone was deleted, and his perception returned to normal as he fell on his ass. He was still inside his house. He felt sick to his stomach. Surprisingly, he managed to run to the bathroom before throwing his guts up after experiencing multidimensional travel. Looking on the bright side, at least he managed to dodge the urgent transfer crisis. He turned to the side and summoned his avatar once more. Sunghyun wondered just what he was supposed to do with such a useless ability from now on. His pondering was interrupted by a congratulatory message for achieving a great feat, courtesy of the system. He managed to return to Earth on his own without using the karma shop after all. As a special reward, he gained access to a dimensional transfer gate that could be used once a day to move to a previously visited location. On top of that, his karma had greatly increased. And just like that, he became the awakened who returned to Earth in the shortest time ever. Bro accidentally speedran his isekai story by discovering a bug. From 0 karma, the system rewarded him with a mind-melting 1.9 million karmas. He just gained a shit ton of points for simply unsummoning his avatar without doing anything else. That would be roughly 10 years worth of accumulated karma all at once. As far as Sunghyun knew, karma is paid based on the impact one has in other worlds. It could be gained through all kinds of things. Good deeds, bad deeds, killing people, working hard, practically everything. Accumulating karma was the main way to strengthen one's skills and even return to Earth. With the sudden windfall of such precious karma, he worried that the system made a mistake and might ask him to return the points. Well, it was not like he cheated or messed up on purpose, so he shouldn't be liable, right? He could easily return to Earth, so the return home item worth 1 million karma was worthless to him. The enhanced status option, on the other hand, was quite eye-catching. Under stamina, he found an enhanced recovery power option worth 10,000 karma. Since he was rich in these imaginary points now, the temptation of the word recovery was practically irresistible. He clicked on the option, and a mysterious power started flowing right into his legs. For the first time in a while, he felt life in his toes. The injury he had been trying to recover from for years started healing at a visible rate. To him, this injury was not merely an inconvenience. It was a wound that marked the loss of his family. The scars that he retained served as the locks that confined him to this lonely room for a long time. Now that his recovery power had surpassed the standard human level, standing up without the assistance of a crutch had become possible. Just like that, he gained a super recovery skill. By nighttime, he had already gotten used to using his legs again. They even got ridiculously strong, stronger than before the incident. Furthermore, he still had a lot of karma remaining in the bank and a lot of things to spend on. For 300,000 karmas, he could enhance his original skill, which meant upgrading his avatar. Without a hint of hesitation, he purchased the upgrade and wondered what he would be able to do with an enhanced avatar skill. To test out the improvements, he summoned the avatar and admired how manly it looked. Surprisingly, the clone returned the compliment. With the enhanced skill, he could now split his consciousness into 2, allowing him to move freely without any problems. Sunghyun also obtained a new skill through the enhancement. It was called Mind Hub. It was a skill that filtered out stimuli and emotions, accepting only the information and sensations he wanted to accept. Not only would he be free from dimensional sickness, but his main body could also filter out the pain if his avatar happened to get hurt. He tested it out by punching the clone. With the avatar knocked out on the floor, Sunghyun celebrated the fact that he could continue venturing into other worlds from the comfort of his room. He could control his avatar as though he was playing a very realistic video game. Moreover, he could summon an additional avatar now, pushing his limit to 2. Sunghyun wondered if he could continuously increase the number of his clones as he grew. To make things easier, these avatars were going to need some names. Admittedly, he didn't have the best naming sense in the world, but Han Sunghyun racked his brain for names. He saw some loose trash on the table, an empty coffee cup and a ketchup pouch, and figured it out. From now on, the first avatar with a high mana affinity will be referred to as Hans, named after the coffee shop where he got the cup. As for the second avatar, with decent durability, he was named Heinz, as in Heinz ketchup. Those mana affinity and durability traits weren't bad, but Sunghyun viewed them as duds. With identifications cleared up, maybe it was time to do the long-awaited main quest now. So he sent Hans to the dimensional transfer gate. As for Heinz, he was tasked to just chill and look good on the couch. Han Sunghyun also had a very important quest to fulfill. He cleaned his place and carried out a year's worth of trash. It had been a long time since he tried and failed, but now, he might be able to finally step outside. After years of isolation, he finally felt the sun on his skin once more. Unlike before, he did not feel anxious about going out at all. This was in part thanks to the ability to use Mind Hub. While he was out, Hans must have arrived in the other world too. By the time Hans had teleported, it was already nighttime in the forest. Just as he was praying for safe passage, hoping nothing would sneak up on him in the dark, a predatory glint appeared nearby. A huge and ravenous black panther came out of the foliage, its gaze fixed on Hans like it was looking at a delicious dinner meal. The beast pounced forward, and Hans reacted by drawing the blade he had prepared beforehand. He used the blade's scabbard to stop the black panther's attack, letting the animal gnaw on steel. The panther's drool slathered all over the scabbard, and it was nasty. As expected of Mind Hub, Hans did not feel the slightest bit of fear or pain in this intense situation. Just like he thought, it was like playing a very realistic game. With the panther retreating, Hans charged forward with a blade injected with mana. In one stab, the panther's blood spilled on the grassy floor of the quiet forest. He would not have been able to do this if he hadn't kept his composure. This encounter just reminded him of how weak he still was. At this rate, staying in this forest and coming across another monster would be very troublesome. Thankfully, he could see a nearby village down the trail. This small village was situated between the forest and the rocky terrain. The place looked peaceful enough. As soon as he entered the front gates, Hans was warmly welcomed by a kind-looking bald old man who introduced himself as Malcolm, the village chief. Chief Malcolm praised the young man for passing through the monster-infested forest path in the late hours of the night. Hans acted modestly and played along. He also asked permission to stay in the village, even just for the night. The kind chief welcomed him with open arms, saying that they should help each other out. In Chief Malcolm's eyes, Hans's outfit and equipment looked foreign. The young man just downplayed the whole thing. The chief said that coming across outsiders was rare in these parts, and it had been a long time since the last one. So, to celebrate, they should grab a drink at the village tavern. With the help of the kind chief, Hans was provided with an empty room to rest his head. He felt wholly welcomed by the warm-hearted village. It had been a while since he enjoyed being around other people. He even drank. Today was a fun day, but it was time to turn in and rest his eyes. While he was deep in slumber, a stranger sneakily entered the room. Meanwhile, Han Sung-hyun's main body was also celebrating on Earth. A cold glass of beer hit the right spot. He showered, ordered chicken and beer, and watched as his avatar traveled the other world. It was the perfect setup. Sung-hyun felt a little sorry for Heinz, though. While he was chilling, the second avatar had to do health training to utilize his durability trait to the utmost extent. He didn't have plans to dispatch him just yet, but it's good to be prepared in advance. Since the clones were working so hard, it would be up to Sung-hyun to find out more info about the other world. From the comfort of his living room, he would play the role of the perfect commander-in-chief. He was in a fantastic mood until he felt something amiss with Hans. An ominous feeling nagged at the back of his mind as though something bad had just happened. Suddenly, the system informed him that his avatar, Hans, had died. All traits and data would be reset. Hans was just celebrating and drinking with the villagers a few minutes ago, and now he's gone. While Sung-hyun was trying to figure out what the hell happened in the other world, Heinz was busy munching on some chicken. Logic dictates that it must be the old guy, village chief Malcolm, behind this duplicitous act. He must have spiked the drinks. Sung-hyun could only blame himself for being too complacent in an unfamiliar place. Surprisingly, he started re-establishing the connection with his supposedly dead avatar. Back in the village, Chief Malcolm expressed his disappointment in the newcomer, whom he thought would be useful. Hans passed through the forest alone in the dark, so this bald head thought he would be talented. Yet here he was, stripped of his flesh, blood, and organs, and undead in the form of an elite skeleton at best. At that moment, the re-established connection allowed Sung-hyun to sense the odd sensation of being nothing but bones. Hans's race had been changed into an undead, and they obtained a special skill called Decomposed Heart. He retained his common and individual traits, but he was no longer human. Becoming undead was quite a shock that he was not expecting at all. However, due to the cleansing effects of the Mind Hub ability, his mind was not corrupted. Hans looked around, trying to find any clues as to where he was. He turned his head to the side and saw a small battalion of people with rotting flesh and some with no flesh at all lined up neatly. Based on the looks of this bizarre display, it might be possible that some twisted freaks were turning the entire village into undead beings. That was when a man walked into the room, seemingly pissed off. Hans did not dare move a muscle. Well, he didn't have any, so he tried to keep his bones as steady as possible. He remembered the man from the tavern yesterday. This dude was just bored after being confined in this remote mountain area, doing some seriously shady stuff for so long. Maybe the villagers Hans drank and celebrated with were dark magicians. Finally, the man noticed the skeleton sitting in the corner of the room, away from the rest of the undead. Hans tensed up at the man's glare. He was afraid that the fact he could move would be noticed. Thankfully, the man wasn't that sharp. He was just annoyed that he had to do some extra work. So, using an ominous voice, he ordered Hans to move over to the rest of the skeletons. His heart may already be rotten, but he could swear that he almost had a heart attack just then. The voice the man used strangely filled him with a power that beckoned him to move forcefully. It was faint enough that he could ignore the order if he resisted, but playing along and pretending to be under control would be the safest bet for now. The man was just done with his troublesome job and complained about how the old geezer was too meticulous, so he had to constantly check on the room. Finally, he left and slammed the door shut. Hans could not help but feel familiar with that feeling of control. Inside him was a power that was making it possible to make a body made up of bones move. Maybe it was because of the mana affinity trait. With a heightened connection to magic, he quickly figured out the crux of mana. If he could get some practice, it might be possible for him to control the other undead in this room. A week had passed since Hans died and turned into an elite skeleton in a strange village. He had been stuck in the concrete room, working around the schedule of the guards to sneak in some practice. Hans was trying to use his natural affinity with mana to command the other undead stuck with him. Today was the day that he managed to make some significant progress in his trial and error approach. He managed to make another skeleton move its lifeless body, standing up clumsily. He was finally making some progress. It took his full concentration to get one to move according to his will, but it was still too unrefined. Moreover, he was limited to controlling just one soldier. Maybe this was the limit of a mere elite skeleton. Hans heard a squeak that he had been hearing for the past week. A rat managed to sneak into the locked room, and the vermin was brave enough to skitter near Hans. He immediately grabbed the rodent off the ground, making it squeal. He finally got the rat that had been scratching his heel for the entire week. This fast little thing had been annoying him for a while now. Speaking of small and fast, Hans considered using the rat as an experiment subject instead of his fellow undead humans. He had nothing else better to do, so he might as well give it a try, right? Using his bony finger infused with mana, he killed the little rat in one stab. Its blood from the mortal wound scattered on the floor. With the rat dead, its corpse was now susceptible to the same principle that Hans had been practicing. Suddenly, the little rodent stood up with renewed vitality, as if it hadn't just been stabbed a moment ago. Hans quietly celebrated his successful experiment. He named this undead rat Alfred, and let him loose. This was the beginning of Operation Nightwatch. Using the inconspicuous animal, he could gather information by listening in on hushed conversations. Alfred was quite a valuable and effective asset when it came to espionage. Now Hans could have eyes and ears on the outside. The whiny grunt came back to the room, still unsatisfied with his working conditions under the old chief geezer. Hans could see the grunt fiddling with another locked room, possibly a warehouse of some sort. Curious, he pondered whether he should send Alfred the rat inside to investigate. He wanted more information, but a thick dark energy was preventing him from even walking near the doorway. Even with Mana Hub neutralizing his emotions, he could still instinctively feel the terror inside this mysterious location. Every one of his senses was telling him that it would be too dangerous to approach any closer. And so, he just waited for the grunt to get out, and listened in on a conversation between grunts regarding some sort of ripening process. Each grunt working under the village chief dreaded that ominous item inside the mysterious room. They called it the fragment of the immortal king. The village may look normal at first glance, but it was filled with guards watching every side. They'd also set traps in every building, even though only fools would dare sneak into this forsaken place. Alfred skittered away after obtaining some valuable info just by eavesdropping. Now he knew about the existence of this fragment of the immortal king. Confident that he could freely go around the village to gather some more info, he wondered where to find the man at the center of this mess, the bald village chief bastard. Unfortunately for Hans, Alfred, the undead rat's second life, is short-lived as he is spotted and killed by someone outside. There was no coming back from this. The culprit used some magical dark blade that spawned directly from the ground to take care of the rat. Of course, it was none other than the village chief himself. He was one vigilant son of a bitch. Even a rat could not escape his detection. Hans worried that he would be caught after this misstep. The chief just found it odd that an undead rat didn't exude the energy of black magic, but its body was strangely filled with dark mana. The bald bastard just chalked it up to the vermin dying of natural causes and transforming into an undead due to dark mana exposure. If that were the case, the investigation would be easy, as there's only one place overflowing with dark mana in this village. As soon as the sinister old man came up to his grunts, they tensed up. When they asked if Jeffy was in charge of the undead warehouse, they tensed up even more. Meanwhile, Hans was mourning Alfred's loss. Although it might have been short-lived, he really liked that rat, and he promised to take revenge on behalf of the little guy. Wherever Alfred's spirit might be, he better watch what Hans had in store for the bastards that put him in his current predicament. By sunrise, Jeffy the Grunt kicked the door of the undead warehouse open, visibly pissed for getting chewed out by his boss for letting a rat crawl in and sneak out of the room. Jeffy wanted to vent his frustrations on the undead, who listened and obeyed his orders. He looked at them as worthless, foolish things, incapable of forming thoughts or moving on their own. Jeffy, the Grunt, was so infuriated and irritated that he socked one of the rotting fleshy zombies right in the jaw for being too slow. Punching something right in the face definitely made the pathetic Grunt feel like a big man. He lifted the zombie's head by the hair to examine its face. Jeffy remembered this rotten zombie from back when he was still human. It was a family man who dared to rebel against the dark magicians to protect his family from a horrific fate and failed. Jeffy, the Grunt, dared the zombie to talk back now. Even if he hadn't been turned into a mindless zombie, he wouldn't be able to do so. Jeffy plucked this guy's tongue out before killing him after all. Finally, he lost interest in the poor undead after venting his anger and frustration. Jeffy missed the days of fun when all they did was hunt down every single person in the village for their mission. He thinks that turning the rebellious zombie's wife into an undead and putting them in the same locked room is a favor. The dark magicians never spared anyone, even young children. At that moment, The zombie stood up from the ground and pounced at Jeffy's shoulder, promising to take a big bite. Its bite was sudden and forceful, tearing through the grunt's flesh, making him bleed, panic, and stumble. He tried his hardest to wrestle back control using the voice to order the zombie, but it was not working. Since the orders didn't stop the zombie from acting out of line, Jeffy busted out his offensive magic spell. Before he could finish casting, the zombie's undead wife also moved, grabbed, and shut Jeffy's stupid ass up, canceling the spell cast. He turned to see the rest of the undead that he was tasked to oversee bum-rushing him down with a vengeance. Jeffy the bastard suffered a painful series of attacks at the hands of the people that he killed and enslaved. Of course, the culprit was the elite skeleton situated at the back of the room. This was just the beginning of Hans's revenge. At the village entrance, a young man was hassling the guards to let him in, as he was allegedly looking for his brother inside, despite the guards' resistance. They refused to let an outsider in so carelessly, and the young man kept requesting to at least see the village chief. Finally, Chief Malcolm came to the gates to see what the commotion was all about. He introduced himself to the young man, and the guards fearfully made way. The old bald bastard was shocked to see the boy's face. It was a young man with an identical face to Hans. It was Heinz, pretending to be Hans's twin brother. Having two bodies to pull off plans like this was really handy. Thanks to Heinz distracting the old man away from the mysterious warehouse, Hans managed to sneak in where the fragment of the Immortal King was housed. This little dark purple fragment was no joke. The overwhelming power it emitted was palpable. It was absorbing the dark energy from the undead battalion he came with. No, it felt more like a mutual resonance rather than absorption. However, the undead beings stationed in this room looked insanely strong, much stronger than the room he was stuck in. Those guys must be the rejects. It pissed Hans off that he was classified as one of those rejects. He didn't even qualify to be trapped in this more important room. Acting out of his hurt pride, he grabbed the fragment and shoved it right into his empty chest. The overwhelming power of darkness exploded inside his ribcage. While this was happening, Heinz was trying his best to buy as much time as possible, keeping Chief Malcolm busy with his cheerful demeanor. He insisted that twins have a secret connection that would always pinpoint the location of one another. Malcolm continued playing along, acting like the benevolent leader. That was until he felt the energy disturbance inside the most important room in this entire village. Heinz and the guards noticed it too. Something was happening with the fragment. Chief Malcolm dropped all pretenses and raced off to the warehouse in his monstrous form as he ordered his guards to kill Heinz. Immediately, the two guards turned their spears against the young man. At least they tried to. Heinz was already out of there. He vanished into thin air. In the warehouse, Hans's mind was filled with immutable thoughts of despair, anguish, and every known negative human emotion all at once. Even though his mind was trying to keep up with the help of the Mind Hub, the intensity and pain were still too much to bear. Now that he was being subjected to the fragment's mental torture, he reckoned that there was not one person who could withstand this experience with their sanity intact. With one final explosion of dark energy, the entire room almost collapsed. The system notified him that he had met the conditions for evolution. Hans walked out of that tribulation as an immortal mage, a Demolic. After absorbing 1 out of 3 existing fragments of the Immortal King, the latent dark magic had assimilated into his body. With this evolution, he gained the special skill of evil wisdom, granting an absolute understanding and talent in dark magic. Clueless as to what was happening, another grunt was cursing Jeffy for getting him saddled with more work just because of a loose rat. His boredom was interrupted by a loud and angry mental message from the master. He reported that nothing was wrong with his post, but a disaster was already brewing with the fragment at the center of it all. The grunt tried to call on Jeffy so they could check out the commotion together, but he did not get an answer. When he got close to the door to take a closer look at what happened to his coworker, the poor grunt was mobbed by the undead inside. Behind them was Hans, a Demolic with the ability to speak the human tongue and have his own free will. He stared at the grunt menacingly. It was about time to break out. The poor grunt used his magic in an attempt to drive the eager zombies away. The door eventually gave out, opening a cascade of undead monsters moving according to Hans's will. He continued talking to the grunt, freaking the poor guy out. Hans could feel the difference in his power level after his evolution. A significant part of it must have been the evil wisdom he obtained. Just by looking at and sensing anything related to dark magic, he could emulate and master spells instantly. In other words, it was an absolute cheat code. The already chaotic village was plunged further into chaos when the whole warehouse blew up in a fiery explosion. Hans calmly walked out of there and made the undead army come forth under his command. He ordered them to have their revenge and not to let a single one of these dark magicians escape. They must kill every horrible human in this village. And so, the undead rebellion started, with Hans as the catalyst. He was expecting an easy sweep of the village, but some of the elite skeleton soldiers started dying off little by little. That was because Chief Malcolm had joined the fray, and he was pissed as he wielded dark magic menacingly. The gentle old man act was fully out the window now. He wanted to know what this mere skeleton did to the fragment of the Immortal King. His real name was Marcos Giocali, an elder in the Vow of Defiance. Hans cheekily asked the elder if he still remembered him from a few days ago. Thanks to this bald demon, he literally lost his heart. He just took it upon himself to pick up a new one from the warehouse. The fragment was now deeply embedded and assimilated into his undead body. The elder gnashed his teeth in anger. To think that such a lowly undead skeleton would fuse with the fragment of the immortal king was preposterous. In his fury, the old fart busted out a gnarly spell, the Finger of Death. Why would you finger a skeleton, bro? The swirling spell made of pure dark magic homed in on Hans. It moved too fast, and he did not have enough time to dodge out of the way. Fortunately, all it did was chop off one of his arms. It didn't even feel painful. He was just annoyed that the old fart would be so impolite and attack while he was still talking. The elder poured every resource and manpower he had for a whole year to hasten the maturation process of the fragment, so he was rightfully furious. He was so close to obtaining power stronger than anything imaginable, only for it to get snatched away by a wise-ass skeleton. The fragment was wasted on just turning an elite skeleton into a demolish. With his fury, he built a nefarious thorn of darkness made purely from dark magic. Hans just realized that putting the fragment into his body must have been like putting a high-tier enchantment on a beginner weapon. He didn't care, though. In this world, he might be the only one who could make the assimilation work. He was certainly convinced that the old fart wouldn't be able to withstand the mental torture. The elder seemed fascinated with Hans's abnormal corrosion resistance, and he wanted to study his body as a test subject once all was said and done. Elder Marcos blasted a broken ectoplasm. Hans criticized the old bastard for being so corny and announcing the names of his skills when he was casting. In his heart, Hans was fighting this fight for the sake of Alfred's revenge. Not knowing who Alfred was, Elder Marcos asked if he was one of the villagers, suspecting that Hans must have infiltrated the village knowing what he was getting into. Suddenly, a potent mass of dark magic appeared on the old fart's flank. He managed to get a barrier up in time, defending against the wailing of dark energy. Elder Marcos was in a pinch, and he knew it. Hans was rapidly becoming accustomed to dark magic by the second, thanks to the power of the fragment. Believing that he couldn't afford to waste any more time while the skeleton was getting stronger, he pulled the trigger on the Pact of Destruction. Elder Marcos's men, who were trying their hardest to resist the attack of the undead, started behaving oddly in the middle of their respective battles. It started with a feeling of almost vomiting, followed by their souls and magic leaving their bodies. One by one, the dark magicians who had served under the old fart with loyalty over the years fell as their souls and magic were sucked away. Elder Marcos accumulated the souls and fashioned them into the crown of the broken. As he rested the crown on his bald head, he gained access to the resting place of the dead. This horrible boss just used the souls of his subordinates to amplify his own power. Hans might have endured the corruptive power of the fragment, but the old fart's next attack might be a different story. He shouted the long-ass name of the technique and was interrupted when he was about halfway through. All the old fart's posturing and trash talk were met with a single shot of fast-moving dark energy into the throat. He could only blame himself for having such elaborate spells. Hans almost fell asleep waiting for the whole title of the spell, so he just finished the fight in one attack. Anyway, thanks to Elder Marcos's display of skills, Hans learned a ton about dark magic quickly. To die such a stupid death was the Elder's final punishment. His life's work, everything that he dreamed of, everything was rendered useless in the hands of a strange skeleton. As the old fart breathed his last breath, Hans looked to the heavens, believing that Alfred the Rat was watching from above. He was probably at peace now that justice was served. Rest in peace, sweet prince. We all hope you get plenty of cheese in heaven. As the war in the remote village wrapped up, a commotion erupted in a faraway kingdom. Inside a sprawling church, a woman of the cloth prayed to her god. As if it were a divine revelation, she became cognizant of what was happening in that faraway village. She immediately sought out Bishop Martin for guidance. This young woman was widely known in the land as Saint Restar, and she needed to address the whole congregation as soon as possible. She had detected a sign of the immortal king's resurrection from the west of the kingdom. Knowing the seriousness of the matter, Bishop Martin hurried to call every relevant member of the church to convene for an urgent meeting. The resurrection of the monster who had plunged the continent into fear hundreds of years ago would be a catastrophe of untold proportions. Saint Restar refused to allow something like that to happen under her watch. Hans walked around the aftermath of the battle and assessed the damage to his undead forces. He had a few hundred under his control, but they were almost wiped out. But the good thing about undead troops was you could always just make new ones and replenish your losses. It's part of the fun of being a necromancer. For now, he really needed to take care of his missing arm first. So, he walked around the battlefield to find a suitable solution. He didn't have to go far until he found a pretty good fit from a fallen skeleton. Hans then activated Super Recovery, enhanced by his deepened understanding of dark magic. It only took 2 seconds to regain his lost limb. Now it's time to raise a new army. He targeted the soulless corpses of the dark magicians littered on the streets to be his new subordinates. Evil wisdom also came with the guiding whispers of the abyss. The fragment of the immortal king was basically lending him the knowledge and power he needed. To create an effective undead soldier, one must contaminate the remaining magic power in the body and scrape away the fragments of consciousness. It was going well at first, but he must have lost concentration in the home stretch, which resulted in the shattering of the undead soldier. Hans thought he did everything right, but this process might be harder than he initially thought. Nevertheless, he managed to raise a new army after a few hours. After a few tries of trial and error, he started getting the hang of it and increased his success rate drastically. Now, he needed to figure out what to do with the corpse of Elder Marcos. Maybe he could turn the dead old fart into an undead with an intact soul so he could extract some information. That would have been the best case scenario, but it might not be possible. Upon closer inspection, it turned out that the Elder of Vow of Defiance did not have a soul. His soul must have been artificially extracted through the magic circle placed on top of his heart. It's highly likely that it was done as some form of security measure from his organization. Since they could carry out an operation this big, it's only natural that they have some insurance. Still, he could just turn the corpse into another soulless undead. This way, he could gain a top-tier undead with both self-awareness and good fighting skills. Just like what he did with the dozens upon dozens of troops, he contaminated the remaining magic power in the old man's body. He gathered the bastard's remaining thoughts and planted a new ego. The result was an undead with the Death Wizard title. The energy swirling around him was a lot thicker than normal dark magicians. What's more impressive is that he retained his white beard. Hans wasn't expecting the Death Wizard to be capable of speech, so it was a pleasant surprise. He decided to retain the old fart's fake name, Malcolm. This way, he could abuse the horrible man even after death. Malcolm might have lost the memories of his past life, but that does not erase the crimes and atrocities he committed. He'd be Hans's punching bag from now on. When his name was called, Malcolm seemed to feel fear for his new master. Hans eyed the old fart's spellcasting cane, and the poor Death Wizard trembled in horror. Hans just gained a new decent weapon. He stood before the pile of bones that belonged to the undead villagers. Among them was the zombie villager abused by the grunts. This was the guy that helped him kill Jeffy. He was the catalyst for this undead revolt. The only gift he could give the villagers who had been turned into grotesque monsters was a final resting place in eternal peace with their families. Hans set the village on fire, burning it down along with its unfortunate denizens. While Hans was burning human bones, Han Sung-hyun was cleaning up plate after plate of fried chicken to bone. Curious, he looked up the current price of gold on the market. The village was occupied by warlocks and dark magicians, and they hoarded gold and treasures like crazy. Now, all of it belonged to him. To take a detailed account of his loot, Sung-hyun summoned Hans to Earth. As soon as the Demilich appeared in his living room, the aura of death and darkness filled the place with dread. Although Hans was his clone, the latent power in this thing was way too much for the normal world. Afraid of what might happen if Hans continued existing on Earth, Sung-hyun canceled the summons. Just from feeling the deathly aura alone, he thought he was going to die. Since he had to summon Hans back to get his loot, perhaps strengthening his unique skill first could be the move. He opened the karma shop and was surprised to find that he earned about 400,000 karmas on top of the other 400,000 he hadn't spent yet. Upgrading his skill cost 300,000, so it was doable. The system explained that as his avatar skill grew, the number of clones he could have would increase. His mental strength had also exceeded the standard, so he acquired the Serenity skill. This would prevent his mind from being swayed by external factors and mental attacks. Now that he could handle summoning Hans for extended periods of time, he could finally take inventory of the treasures he gained. Seeing how he still felt fine while working beside his Demilich clone, Serenity must be the stronger version of Mind Hub as it applied to Sung-hyun's main body too. It seemed like he was always granted the skills he needed when he needed them. For now, it's time to sell the gold and cash out the fruits of his labor. He brought bags upon bags filled to the brim with shimmering gold in front of experts and simply tasked them to deposit the cash into his account. By the time he exited the establishment, the whole store was treating him like their most valuable patron. In case of unforeseen events, he also hid Hans in his shadow using dark magic. He even made his Demilich clone wear a mask in case he had to summon him in front of other people. Just as he was thinking about his newfound wealth obtained without any problems, the store exploded. A beast came out of the explosion, laughing maniacally. Two robbers, one that looked like a werewolf and one that looked like your run-of-the-mill thief, quickly stole the newly deposited bags of gold. They were not expecting to have such a good harvest in such a remote place, but they still needed to run and escape. The man-thief rode the werewolf, and they darted off into the streets with unbelievable speed. These two were supervillains. They are awakened people who commit crimes using their abilities. Opposed to them are the guardians who protect the citizens. Seeing the two villains running off to God knows where Sung-hyun was stunned. He remembered that traumatic day when he lost everything. He was knocked back into reality when the werewolf smacked him out of the way while they continued to run. The guardians would probably track these villains down. Han Sung-hyun thought that he had changed. But even after all his new experiences, he was still the same dude who freezes in the face of adversity. The thieves might really get away with it. Since the guardians take about 3 minutes to respond to crimes, the criminals have plenty of time to hide themselves. All the two needed to do was join someone called Portal, and this would be a perfect crime. The girl named Portal, whom they were supposed to meet at a getaway point, was lying on the floor, motionless. The two thieves tried to wake her up to no avail, and in the dark corners of the getaway point stood a skeleton. Hans walked towards the villains menacingly, emitting an aura of death around his body. The thieves immediately got the vibe that this stranger was not a guardian. Han Sung-hyun admitted that he couldn't do anything by himself at the moment. But the immortal mage Demilich named Hans definitely could. Skeleton soldiers dug their way out of the ground, shocking the villains. It was time to teach these people not to mess with overpowered clones. A team of suited-up officers rushed to the villains' getaway point after tracking them down from the robbery. The Guardians of the South Korean Returners Association had a history with the robbers. By history, I mean they'd never been able to catch them. As soon as they arrived at the site, the team leader froze at what he saw. All of the villains lay on the ground, motionless. With the Guardians lacking response time, someone had already fought and defeated the villains and disappeared. It hadn't been long, so the one who did this must still be nearby. The team leader urgently tasked his subordinates to search around for any signs of whoever neutralized the robbers. The one they were looking for, Hans, had already returned to his shadow form, rushing back to Han Sung-hyun. Sung-hyun resolved the problem without lifting a finger. Overall, today was a refreshing day for him. He even thought that relieving stress by beating up villains from time to time might be something he could get behind. The very next day, Sung-hyun's second avatar, Heinz, set out on his own journey. His destination was the nearest big town, and things seemed to be looking up. Malcolm, that old geezer, might be a duplicitous dark magician of death, but he wasn't lying about the town east of the village. Heinz entered the gate and marked the start of his official debut in the other world. But the vibe inside was far from what he was expecting. He was expecting to explore a place bustling with activity, but the town seemed oddly empty for its size. They didn't even conduct checks at the gates, nor were they interested in foreigners. Walking around, he came across some scary-looking thugs hassling a young lady in an isolated alley. They demanded 2 silver coins in 3 days, or they would do some unsavory things to the young lady. Heinz looked at this tiring cliché of city thugs exploiting a young girl and scoffed. He didn't want to meddle in this troublesome business. But he might not have a choice, as the fleeing young woman bumped into him on the way out of the alley. She repeatedly apologized for bumping into him. Heinz asked if she knew the town well. He said he didn't want to get involved in anything troublesome, but he was going to need a guide anyway. She looked up, seemingly surprised that he didn't act like a bastard. Heinz took out 2 silver coins and introduced himself as her soon-to-be employer. Looking at the pair of silver coins in his hand, her eyes lit up. They lit up even more when he proposed they should discuss the working conditions. After a cursory tour of the town, they ended up in a local inn. According to the girl, this accommodation was one of the better places to stay in town. Over the course of their initial tour, Heinz found out that the girl's name was Diana. She had been trying to earn some money to take care of her sick little brother after losing their parents. She was also on the hook for tribute money with some shady people. Today's tour earned her 2 silvers, and Heinz needed her for tomorrow as well. As soon as Heinz hit the bed, he tried to convince himself that he was just doing a good deed, even if he was getting ripped off. And so he concluded the uneventful first day of his adventure. This inn might be the best in town, but the bed was so uncomfortable that he hardly got enough sleep. He heard a girl sneezing outside and decided to look out the window to see what was going on. It turned out that Diana had been camping outside the inn, waiting for him to wake up. She might have contracted a cold from staying out for so long, but she still greeted her new boss with a smile. The sun hadn't even fully risen yet. Heinz invited her in to get some breakfast. He also asked her to just come during lunchtime instead of camping out so early in the morning. Diana was hardly listening to his words as she was focused on the food on the table. She even eyed the unfinished bread and eggs on his plate, and he let her have it as she looked hungry. Instead of eating the meal right then and there, she actually stored them in her bag. The town's name was Azanthu. It was a small territory on the western side of the Thalia kingdom. It may have looked like an ordinary medieval town, but there was just something slightly off about everything. There was an odd symbol littered all over the place. It looked like a drawing of a monster's fangs. It didn't look like it was drawn with paint, though. Diana explained that these symbols were drawn using blood. That morbid fact didn't bother Heinz too much as he tried to smell if it really was drawn with blood. Diana randomly asked if Heinz had eaten a soup containing venison for dinner last night. She could tell simply by smelling because she had an abnormally good nose. Her sense of smell was so sharp that it could even be considered a special ability. Diana explained that the morbid symbol was the emblem of an organization called Varkalak. They oversaw the roads. Just as she was about to continue sharing more information about Varkalak, Diana stopped in her tracks. She did so because she smelled something familiar from afar. Diana took another whiff of the air and confirmed her suspicion. It was the scent of freshly baked bread, a bread so good that everyone should try it if they happened to be in Azanthu. They had just eaten a moment ago, and this young lady was already hunting for the next food spot. If they hadn't rushed off to the bakery at that time, she would have smelled something entirely different wafting in the air. The smell of blood. A few days later, Heinz posted up at his meeting spot with Diana, but she was uncharacteristically late for their appointment today. Standing around in the open attracted some unwanted attention his way. The city thugs he saw on his first day approached him with a proposition to talk. He couldn't be bothered to waste time with these low lives, so he took out a few silver coins to pay them off and get them off his back. Heinz even acted as though he was donating some silver coins to help keep public order, which the city thugs liked. Heinz had already prepared some funds for this type of thing. On the neck of the bald thug was a tattoo of the same symbol littered all over the walls around town. Diana had also warned him not to linger near the back alleys and even advised him to leave the city as soon as possible. The fear she had for the thugs of Varkalak ran deep. As the thugs walked away, Heinz overheard them talking about a kid they'd captured under the boss's orders. Hearing the mention of an abducted kid alarmed Heinz. His mind immediately jumped to the worst-case scenario, thinking they had kidnapped Diana. Heinz promised not to meddle in troublesome business, but he shouted at the thugs to wait up. He knew that when it came to tense situations like this, momentum was important. If it got too dangerous, he could always just cancel the summon at any time. He steeled his resolve and told the thugs he was curious about something. At that moment, Diana showed up, proving his assumption wrong. And now, he had 2 pissed-off thugs on his ass. They confronted him about his curiosity, their tone veiled with threats. Not wanting to get in trouble with the Varkalak, he offered to give them even more silver coins for the inconvenience. The thugs took advantage of the situation and cleaned his coin pouch out. They took everything. He couldn't help but be irritated at Diana for being late and making him worry. As punishment, she wouldn't be having any free food today. Diana just started tearing up. She was late because her little brother had suddenly disappeared. The little boy had already recovered from his illness and became healthy again thanks to all the food Heinz had given the siblings for free. Now he was gone, and Diana didn't know what to do. Heinz immediately connected the dots. Those Varkalak thugs had just been talking about abducting a kid. It was highly likely they were the culprits. When he asked Diana if Varkalak might be involved, a look of utter terror spread across her face. She started screaming in anguish at the thought of her little brother falling into the hands of Varkalak. Heinz assured her that if those people demanded a ransom, he would shell out the cash. But Diana knew that if they were really the ones behind her little brother's disappearance, Aaron would die. What those criminals wanted wasn't money, but blood. Heinz asked why that would be the case, and Diana finally explained the open secret regarding this town. Azanthu might look like a normal town at first glance, but this place was nothing but a giant food storage for vampires. Speaking of vampires, the monster of the night had just finished feasting on blood. He could smell the pungent scent of dark mana nearby. He wondered if there was an internal conflict involving the fragment of the immortal king. It was a shame he would have to move to harvest a fruit he had been waiting to mature so soon. The vampire of Azanthu, a handsome man with crimson red eyes, sharp fangs, and pale hair and skin, had set his eyes on another meal.